This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening and night. The conference will start in a few minutes, in 4 minutes. We ask you to mute yourself, please, so that we don't have any disruption in the sound, okay? Thank you. I know you have problems with the sound. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, thank you. Johnny Goldberg from South Africa.
Okay, thank you, Johnny.
Şey yapamıyoruz ya. Helen duyuyor. Hı? Helen duyuyor. Helen yazmış sana.
Hello, everybody. This is Renata.
Hello, Renata. This is Paula.
Hi, Renata.
Paula.
Cecilia speaking.
Hi. Hi to everybody.
Hi.
Hi,
From India.
from Bangladesh.
Hello, this is Roberto. We are starting in 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. Okay, just mute yourself, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. In Europe, at least. Good morning in Latin America. Good evening and night, and good night to our ASEAN members. Thank you again for joining us today. Before starting, as we usually do, we kindly ask everyone to mute your micros, of course, except for the speakers. Except for the speakers when they have to intervene. If you have any weak connection to internet, a good idea is to turn off your cameras. Otherwise, we also are happy to see your faces to the extent of possible. Okay. I also want to remind you that the chat function is available should you want to raise any questions and comments. It's good that you do it on this panel that you have on your right side, because that will help us to optimize the time for interaction. We'll keep track of all of them during the conference, and then we'll try to summarize all of them to the speakers. This is the 8th digital conference of a series of conferences that we IOE are organizing with our members, but also with relevant stakeholders on the COVID-19 business action. Our goal is to share with our network the latest information on the evolution of this disease, but most importantly, to discuss with you around the best response practices around the world to identify good action. I have been asked by my team, and I want to also underline, this is not just Roberto, it's a strong team of IOE working behind us. In this case, with Luis Rodrigo and Rita, but many others also, like Marina, Elodie, etc., working hard to this to happen and to have a good exchange. The team is asking me to be strict with time because, you know, this digital exchange cannot last more than 1.5 hours is the optimal time. So we need to be much more efficient in time consumption. We have had different exchanges, as I said before. The first one was more general. Then we had another one on telework policies, another one on economic measures, another one on health and safety, together with the WHO. We are trying now to identify diverse labor measures implemented by government, but also by employers during this period, with the idea of identifying what is working and what is not working. We know that many of these measures are very drastic and are creating not the best atmosphere within the social dialogue scenario, but also within society as such and at the workplace. I don't have to repeat how unprecedented times we are living. I would say that it's not just about a pandemic, it's also about perhaps a new scenario for the international scene, for the international order. But also it's affecting on a daily life, the workplace. So at the stake is also the sustainability of enterprise and because they will largely depend on their capacity to ensure the continuity of business and minimize the financial impact. The greatest challenge for companies is managing the immediate impact of the business slowdown on their workforce, together with preparing already for recovery. And last week, we heard some insights from our Chinese members who already were advancing how they are bringing back people from telework to the workplace, and it was very challenging. I want to insist, please mute yourselves, because otherwise we hear noises. There is someone who is already using the mic. Please mute yourself. The measures that are employment related and also related to industrial relations can be, related to sick leave, short time, telework, hourly paid, unpaid leave, minimum wage, temporary dismissals, paid time off, flexible schedules, adjust overtime, time off after crisis, bonus. All these measures, some of them have been already put into place when we had the last financial crisis, and some countries perhaps are more advanced in terms of how to implement it. There are some new elements that are coming in this crisis, but one of them perhaps is the dismissals aspect in some countries are now being forbidden. It's quite a disruptive element in some of the jurisdictions of our members. For this purpose, or for this exchange, we have the honor of counting with our members, with the expertise of our members, that many of them are negotiating, discussing with their respective governments these measures, and also discussions are under place to see how they implement them. They will enlighten us with different country cases and perspectives. We will listen to the intervention of all our speakers, and then after that, we'll dedicate some time to answer the questions that you send via chat function. If we have time, also we'll bring that orally. We'll give you the floor also to explain it, okay? Without further delay, I will ask Renat Hornung-Raus, Managing Director of the BDI on European and International Affairs, but also our Vice Chair for Europe. And also she is the chair of our Industrial Relations Policy Working Group. So we want us to give us some insights which will help to set the scene. Renat, you have 15 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and hello, good day to everybody. It's really a pleasure to have you here, even if only virtually by digital means, but it shows that we can communicate even in times of crisis. So I would like to just give you a couple of points which are quite striking when we look at how this crisis has been unfolding. And I think the first point will be on the medical, or the way to the medical approaches to this virus, where we could see different philosophies. And I think these different philosophies are visible also in the red and yellow colors you could see on the world map, which is really very, very illustrative. Roberto, thank you very much for that. We could see one approach, which I would call the Asian approach, and that was exercised by China first, which was the one of containment. So the moment this virus was discovered and the contagious nature of this virus was discovered, very radical measures were taken with a lot of testing and isolating the people infected to avoid the spread of the pandemic, of the virus, and to try and contain it. In European countries, we have had controversial discussions and some different lines, also including, for instance, the German government, but also the Dutch and probably also other European governments, where they said, following other virologists' philosophies. We don't contain it. We don't want to take such drastic measures at a very early stage. We rather want to have a kind of controlled infection so that we achieve a kind of herd immunity with 60 to 70 percent of people having caught the virus, and then people will be immune for next time the virus comes around. And the challenge is described as controlling this kind of infection in a way that the healthcare systems do not can cope with it, and they don't get too many patients at the same time, and they don't get sort of blocked down. Now, what we have observed, unfortunately, is that this second strategy didn't work, because the virus is more contagious and probably it's also more dangerous than was perceived in the beginning. And so what we see now, once the virus has spread extremely rapidly, and you know the figures, and you could see them with very high figures in Italy and Spain, but also in Germany, increasing a lot, in Austria, and actually nearly all countries, that now the measures that need to be taken become more and more restrictive and move more and more towards containment, because the healthcare systems cannot cope anymore with them. So in a way, probably a first lesson to be drawn is that very radical action very soon may help solve the crisis, the medical aspect of the crisis, much more quickly than waiting. And this is what we have to learn ex post, I think, from this development. And actually, even this afternoon, the German government is about to discuss whether the current measures are sufficient, or whether they need to be made more radical, for instance, obliging people to wear masks, or obliging them to stay home. So from the medical point of view, what we can see in the European countries is that the measures vary. We actually had a Business Europe conference call this morning to compare the situation. They vary from hardly no obligatory measures in Scandinavia, where it is only a recommendation to have social distancing and so on, and at the same time the spread of the virus is rather mild. It's pretty well contained, because people have a huge, well, they have a culture which is probably less sociable, which is more based on social distancing, and so for them it's not so difficult to follow these advices. Down to very drastic legal measures of declaring the state of emergency, like in Portugal, for instance, or in Hungary, or in other countries, and obliging people to stay confined in their houses, locking down, shutting down the entire business world, except of course for those businesses which produce vitally important products like food and health products. So the range of medical restrictions for medical purposes is very different. And of course this has impacts on the way the companies are affected. So what we can see from the company side, from the way the social affairs or the labor market measures are being taken, we also see this very different and very diverse approaches, ranging from what Roberto mentioned, I think in Spain, a kind of very, how shall I say, authoritarian way of dealing with it, whereby dismissals for economic reasons are simply prohibited. This is, but to my knowledge, this is the only country where this is the case, but maybe colleagues can correct me on that. To other situations where, like in the UK, for instance, where the companies have also been locked down, but then people where companies were not locked down could claim unpaid leave to stay home with their children because the schools have been closed, or going to the measures we have seen in Scandinavia, and we also see in Germany, and I think also in France and in other countries, where the already existing models of short-time work and subsidies for companies either reducing drastically their activities or closing down altogether can keep their workers on the payroll, but they will only pay pro rata, and the pay will be complemented by a special fund from in Germany it's from the Federal Labor Agency. In other countries it's other governmental funds, public funds, for this short-time work, or in French they call it chômage partiel. Which has the advantage that companies can close down or reduce their activities with no financial risks, and at the same time they can keep the workers on the payroll and mobilize them as soon as they need them again, and the workers do not lose their job, they do not become unemployed. And in these countries, typically we don't see any legal restriction on dismissals for economic reasons, because the legal framework stays the same, and these short-time schemes are actually set up as an emergency measure. What we have also seen is for small companies in particular, that governments are stepping up measures to make sure they don't lose their liquidity and they don't go bankrupt because all their value chains have broken down, so they cannot sell anything, they don't get cash flow, and they end up in a state of illiquidity very quickly if they don't get helps from public funds, which are both subsidies or credit lines. And that's extremely important, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. And then we come to the third level of activities, which is precisely the medium term, the outlook for the end of the crisis. How can companies or the economies be supported in developing once the crisis is going down? So big discussions are taking place as to what will be the moment when this lockdown can be released again and made less stringent, less radical. But then also the issue is about supporting companies also in the medium term to get back to their previous level of activities. But I would agree with you, Roberto, that probably the world after this crisis will not be the same as before. What we see in the single market is that, of course, with medical measures to prevent the spread of the virus, also the borders were closed, which is a phenomenon we were not used to any longer from most of the countries in the single market, because of the so-called Schengen Agreement, which foresaw that most continental European countries, including Switzerland, also did not do any border controls anymore, and these controls were reintroduced. Also, the borders were closed by many countries, including by Germany, for instance, for seasonal workers, which leads to a situation of acute shortages of seasonal workers in agriculture. I think this would be the case also in other countries, like in France or in Scandinavia. And where big discussions are taking place, how can we compensate for those workers who stay at home now and who would have been seasonal workers? We also are, how shall I say, grappling a little bit with a somewhat bureaucratic approach by the European Commission on the coordination of social security for cross-border commuters, and we have lots of them, especially because the economic areas around the borders, like to France or to Switzerland, to Austria, to the Czech Republic, to Poland, and so on, Belgium, Netherlands also are very, very active regions, and so we have many commuters in both directions, into Germany and out of Germany. And of course, most of these commuters are now working in home office or teleworking because the companies want to reduce the risk of spreading and avoid waiting lines on the border controls, and borders have been closed to some extent. So here we have very pragmatic rules which have been agreed at bilateral level, for instance, between the German and the French government, saying that when a worker who is affiliated, for instance, to German social security systems, who lives in France and is a cross-border commuter to Germany, even if he now works from home, which is France, this doesn't change his affiliation to the social security system simply because it's a short-term and crisis measure. And this is absolutely reasonable that these short-term shifts to home office do not affect the basic arrangement and therefore do not affect the social security affiliation. Unfortunately, the European Commission has come out with a communication on the mobility of workers, which is much more bureaucratic, which would presuppose that there need to be requests made to the authorities, and the authorities of the two countries need to agree on modalities and so on. And we are just in the process of telling the European Commission, listen, you're not living up to the situation, because you cannot adopt a kind of bureaucratic approach to a force majeure situation, which is something absolutely exceptional and also hopefully very short term. There are quite a number of very controversial discussions also within the business community about how to help and support economically the different member states of the European Union, and how to provide as quickly as possible help to them. And in this regard, there are a number of countries who are requesting the famous Euro bonds, that the European Union should give bonds which would be guaranteed by every member state. They are now called Corona bonds. This is to make sure that the spread of interest rates for different member states on the financial markets isn't intervening and hampering precisely the crisis countries to get these bonds and get their refinancing on the financial markets. Now, this is a very controversial issue, which is controversial both among governments and also among the business community. And here there will be a discussion this afternoon, a video call of the presidents of Business Europe to discuss the positions of the European employers with regard to these instruments, and to also discuss what other means are there which could be stepped up to help very, very quickly the countries and the companies all along Europe to survive this crisis and to start anew once the virus has been contained. I'm sure I haven't mentioned all the nuances and all the details, but this was a kind of overview and setting the scene. And I really look forward to listening to colleagues and to their presentations about the different examples. I will have to leave you at about 2:45, so precisely to join this Business Europe conference call. But until 2:45, I'm here. And thank you very much indeed. And back to Roberto.
Thank you, Renat. Indeed, you have set the scene. I mean, the insights that you are providing us on different measures, but also linked to the mobility aspect that sometimes we forget. Not just within the border, but also outside the border, cross-border, is also quite interesting. I want to make two reminders. First of all, questions can be written on the panel that you have on the right. You are going to optimize the time on that. I have been also asked by the communication team from IOE that at a given moment will make a kind of a screenshot for communication purpose. So those of you who do not want to appear in this screenshot, you can turn off your cameras. And then I'll give the floor to Paola. Paola works in Confindustria. Confindustria is the main business organization. Paola's story in the employment, labor, and human capital development of Confindustria Italy. Confindustria is the main business and employer organization in Italy. We know how hard is the situation in Italy and how difficult also is for the business employees organization to be liaising with the government in this critical moment. So I want to thank, first of all, for your time and also in advance for your insights. Paola, the floor is yours. We will thank you if you can.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much.
Mm.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Renata. Thanks for this invitation today to join you here. And this, of course, gives us the possibility to illustrate the situation in Italy, the Italian institutional context of the crisis, and of course, the measures adopted by the Italian government, as well as the actions that have been promoted and implemented by social partners, of course. Before starting and comment my slides, I just would like to give you a very brief reconstruction of the timing of the outbreak of COVID-19 in Italy. You probably know that in Italy, the outbreak of the virus started to be quite serious at the end of February. And then we recorded a very rapid increase in the contagion on the first days of March. So the first week of March is the period when the Italian government started to enact a series of law decrees, which were quite progressive. So we can say as a first comment that the approach taken by the Italian government to manage this crisis was a progressive approach. Implementing decrees low decrees, considering the development of the level of contagion in Italy. You also know that the mostly hit region in Italy is Lombardy. Unfortunately, the emergency is still very high in that part of Italy. And then, of course, there has been the widespread in the whole Italian territory. But in any case, the northern Italy is mostly hit rather than the rest of the country. As I was saying before, the government has enacted a long series of decrees. Of course, I cannot go into the details. I won't do that. But I have to mention one of these decrees, which was enacted on March 11. And it is the first decree in which the Italian government has, for the first time, shut down some activities. Which ones? Well, the shutdown was referred to the commercial and retail commercial trade activities. So all restaurants activities, for example, cafes and the restaurants were completely shut down. Okay, so this was a first measure, which was quite a strong measure, but was considered as necessary considering the high and rapid wave of people getting ill and hospitalized. The same decree also stated that all productive industrial activities and professional activities could be carried on, provided that these activities would comply with a series of recommendations, which were focused on the application of smart working as far as possible, on the incentivization of days off from work to employees where possible, on the application of health and safety protocols, very important, and also on promoting specific procedures for example, sanification, disinfection of company premises, and another important reference, also recommendations based on the possibility for social partners to find agreements in order to find organizational solutions in order to manage the situation. Okay, this decree is very important in my presentation because it represents the legal basis for the tripartite agreement about which I will talk after. And in fact, in this same law decree, the Italian government has formally committed itself to support the stipulation of agreements between social partners in order to comply with the recommendations that I have already mentioned. And I will now start commenting the slides that you are also viewing. And here in the first chart, you see the four points of the presentation. I will now go directly to the one very important measure that has been undertaken by the government with another decrease, which was implemented around mid of March, and which has created the separation between essential and non-essential sectors, meaning by that only the activities considered as essential were authorized to be carried on, whilst the non-essential sectors were blocked, completely blocked, with reference then to the possibility to activate smart working. So you can easily understand how difficult was this exercise for the Italian government. Of course, Confindustria has worked very narrowly with the government in order to define all the activities to be considered as essential. And how did the government, we can shift to the second slide, how did the Italian government manage this distinction? It was necessary to take into consideration a formal act. And the Italian government decided to utilize the ATECO codes. ATECO are the Italian version of the Eurostat's NACE. And by creating a long list of economic activities to be considered essential, mainly including food industry, chemical and pharmaceutical industry, some machinery and plant maintenance subsectors, as well as energy and utilities industry, transport industries, and medical equipment distribution and supermarkets. This was the first classification of the essential activities. Just to consider some data, according to some estimates supplied by the Italian Ministry of the Economy, these activities refer to around 2.2 million firms in Italy, nearly half of the total number of companies, and refer to 8.6 million workers. So again, you can see the dimension of these activities. It was very difficult to arrive to that kind of classification and to discuss with the government also the insertion of further activities. That's what Confindustria has done. And specifically, we have warned the government about the fact that it was very limiting to base oneself on the ATECO classification because of the fact, for example, that production chains are very complex. They are very long, and so if you exclude some of the activities which are not considered as essential, you might create very big problems to essential sectors. In any case, the government has taken this measure as the reference measure to establish which activities could be continued. We can now shift to the next chart. When I talked about the law decree of 11th of March, I mentioned it because this is the legal reference for the agreement which is mentioned in this chart. The tripartite agreement of 14th March, in fact, is the result of what the government had stated in that decree by supporting the possibility for social partners to execute some agreements. And that's what the social partners did, working together with the government. And the result was the undersignment on 14th of March between the government, Confindustria, and the three most representative trade unions in Italy, CGIL, CISL, WIL, of a very important act, which is called the Protocol for Ensuring Worker Safety and for Contrasting the Contagion of the Virus in the Workplaces. Let me just resume the importance of this protocol. Yes, before coming there, I just would like to stress the fact that the protocol is what we call in Italy accordo quadro, a framework agreement. It is a text which already contains a list of recommendations, and that has to be transposed at company level by each single company that wants to continue its economic activity. So at today's date, all our member companies which are operating have all transposed this protocol. So the protocol we can ship to the next slide, of course, contains, as I was saying, a list of, and specifically 13 recommendations going from the duty of information, for example, the information on the right conducts to be undertaken to prevent infection. And then you have a lot of details about the conducts that workers also have to have within the company. It contains recommendations on how to regulate access and exit from the firm's premises. It contains recommendations regarding personal protective equipment and how to manage it within the company premises. It also contains indications on the sanitization and the hygienic procedures to guarantee safe conditions in workplaces. It also contains recommendations on how to manage the common space of the premises, and very important reference, it also contains a recommendation on the need to adapt the working organization of a company. And here, of course, there is an important role of social partners, which might decide in which ways the adaptation can take place. You can shift to the next chart. And I'm coming now to a very important remark, which derives from my previous comments. And that is to say that the results of the measures that I have been describing is a very important increase in the application of smart working policies in Italy. You have to consider that both the law decrees enacted by the government and the same protocol stipulated by the social partners and the government is considering the smart working as the priority mean to utilize for continuing working activity. This is a very new situation in Italy. We already have an Italian law ruling on smart working, and this law provides the necessity of an agreement at company level to activate smart working. This is not any longer the case because during the emergency, the government has stated in one of its decrees that smart working can be activated in a very smart, very quick, and very simple manner. Also, if there are no agreements at company level. So smart working policies have been activated very quickly, we have to say, in every firm. And this is a very important result, we have to say, because we had to react really in an urgent manner. And there are also some data which are very interesting. You can see on the bottom of the chart, according to the Ministry of Labor, it has been calculated that in the first 2 weeks of March, more than 500,000 workers are working in Italy with smart work. So I think this is also very important to stress.
That's very impressive, Paola. If I may,
yes, very impressive. In just 2 weeks, we have reached that kind of number. So we can shift to the next one, please. Thank you. And I would say that the first part of my presentation is concluded with the reference to the smart working policies. But now I want to introduce the second and last part, which is really very, very important in our perspective, so in the perspective of industrial relations, because we are referring here to the very important role played by the Italian system of social safety nets. You know that Italy has a very structured system of social safety nets. That's what we call cassa integrazione. We have 3 types of cassa integrazione in Italy, and in general we can define the cassa integrazione as wage supplementary schemes, which consists of income support measures that are being paid to workers when the working activity is suspended or reduced for reasons which are not ascribable to the employer's responsibility, which is the case of the coronavirus contagion, of course. Just consider that since 2015, this scheme applies to every sector of activity and to employers employing more than 5 persons. And exceptionally, and this is the really new measure, one of the decrees of the government, and specifically the decree number 18, has extended the possibility for every employer, regardless of the dimension of the company, regardless of the contribution payment, to access this mechanism in a very simple, smart, and quick way. So this is a great help, of course. First of all, to all workers who are experiencing, of course, undergoing a very, very serious economic situation, of course, for companies too. And another news that I can give you is that 2 days ago, in Italy, there has been a very important agreement undersigned by the Italian Banking Association, Confindustria, and trade unions. For what purpose? For anticipating the payment directly to the workers. So this means that instead of activating the administrative procedures involving the INPS, the National Social Security, to start the procedure and then pay the workers, the Italian banks will pay directly workers. Then I don't go into much detail because there is a specific procedure that has to be activated. There is a banking account that has to be opened, and as soon as the National Social Security will pay the sum, then the banks will recover the money they have anticipated. But anyway, what I want to stress here is the very significant role that through the social safety nets, social partners in collaboration with the government, of course, have been playing, are still playing. And of course, this also want to stress also the financial effort of the government, because you see in the last line, the financial effort that is being put to finance this mechanism. Apart from the contribution being paid by employers, the state will finance that with a huge amount of financial resources.
Which is very impressive.
So,
it's 13.5 billion or 9.3 billion. I think you have referred to many things, Paul. I think it's very, very illustrative. I mean, you referred to essential services and to work from home, but one of the most important elements that I saw there is the tripartite agreement. It's very rare.
Yes, I would say that this is the central. Yes, I would say that the protocol really is a practical measure, very rapidly implemented, with a huge role of social partners and with very specific and concrete indications to be given, and which has been given to companies. And you also have to consider that all this had to be managed in 1-2 days. So you can just imagine how difficult it has been.
It says a lot about the level of your social dialogue, despite all the challenges. Thank you so much. I want also to remind everybody that all these presentations, with your permission, will be shared, and also this conversation will be registered.
Thank you, Roberto. Of course.
I don't know if Marina has ready a slide that I wanted to put here, because it's a kind of slide joke. Well, if not, we'll do it later. No worry. I want to go now.
And if I may just add something, Roberto, I would like to tell to all our colleagues that I'm participating to this conference also with my 2 colleagues, Giulia Don Giovanni, who is the expert of social safety nets in Confindustria, and my colleague Giovanni Morleo, who is the economist. He's also expert on statistical data referred to labor policies. In case of any question on any technical question, they will help us. Thank you, Roberto.
That's great. That's great to have such an important team. I just want to put one slide that we received yesterday. I think it was from our Spanish. This is the regulation of essential services in some countries. It's so tricky. It's so detailed that nobody understands what essential service is, and in this critical moment, it's important. I just want to give the floor to the next speaker, and we have Fernando from Mexico. Mexico is experiencing a very tricky situation with a government which is not perhaps the most business-friendly government, but which is not perhaps reacting as it should in terms of anticipating the emergency. Renat referred to that. Those countries that did best are those which took drastic measures well on time. I don't think that's the case. But Fernando is going to raise more the points related to the employment measures that are being taken now in the country, which is also experiencing a kind of drastic change in their industrial relations system at the same time. Fernando, the floor is yours. I know that we are asking you miracles to do that in 10 minutes, but please do that in a short time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Roberto. I would definitely try to do my best for this situation. It's a pleasure to say hi to all my colleagues. And well, let me dig in. First of all, I would like to say that the situation in Mexico has changed drastically from a few hours ago. Yesterday night, the government finally published a new decree where it states the new extraordinary measures that are supposed to be taken in the workplaces. It's been a long road to achieve this. Unfortunately, our government has been has been in the spotlight for the past weeks, not for the good response of this situation, but for the lack of response and how they have taken advantage, which is still ongoing, taking advantage of this situation to send out a political message, which has been very damaging for everybody, especially there's a lot of uncertainty in the companies. There's a lot of uncertainty at bad misinformation in the media. And that's what it's arriving to the employees. So that's a very complicated issue that we are trying to deal with. But let me talk about the present. On Sunday night, the Undersecretary of Health, which is the person that has been really dealing with all this problem, not the secretary himself, not the president, the Undersecretary has been taking matters on this problem, and he on a press conference he declared the state of emergency, a health emergency finally in the country, with clear specific measures on how things were going to happen. In this health emergency, they decided to shut down completely all activities that were not considered essential for the purposes of managing the spread of the virus, which in short sounds great for all the things that's been going on. There's still a lot of people in the street. There's still a lot of people that are taking this as vacations. They have to, in certain governments, they had to implement local measures such as closing down malls, parks, even beaches, because people are still using them. So there's a lot of also unconsciousness. And with this health emergency, now we raise the question if that was enough for the employers to use the legal framework that we currently have. So let me just get you back a little bit in the past. As you can remember, in 2009, we had a very serious epidemic that was the H1N1. The main focus was Mexico City, and at most we had a shutdown of 1 week. For those times, it was unprecedented, and of course, we didn't have many tools that we currently have, legally speaking. The government set out certain measures that were effective because not much happened. And then the law changed to adapt a new wording, a new legislation to prevent, in case this happens again, how we were supposed to act. And this is where things start getting tricky, because the current government, which for those who are not familiar with their policies, they are very aligned to the populist agenda, for a matter of speaking. Unfortunately, they have been using a language that is completely apart and different from what the law states, so that we cannot, so as employers, we are not able to use the legal framework that we have in our hands, which is basically a sanitary contingency that allows employers to suspend labor relationships and pay at least to every employee a daily minimum wage. Of course, every single person in the workplace is allowed to arrive into certain agreements with the employer. Social dialogue is always a great tool. But the government, the president, I'm pretty sure that without the consent of his cabinet, has been saying that all employees should go home, but with full salary. So that created a lot of problems. Right now, there's a lot of misinformation. And with the new health emergency, then the question raised to, whereas are we in this legal state where we can actually access to these regulations, or how are we supposed to manage it? And yesterday night, these new measures were finally published in our official gazette, which is a formal requirement. And after a thorough analysis with all my team, after a a very complicated time on how to deal with this, and many questions of our clients and many companies, we decided that what the government has done is, under the powers they have from our constitution, they have declared something unique as a health emergency that is completely different to what the labor law refers to. And basically, they have the power to shut down every business without having to use the legal framework that we have in our labor law. So now we come with the question to what are the essential activities? Because although we do have a list, we have not been as thorough and as disciplined as Italy has done it. The decreed executive order do mention a set of activities that are considered essential for attacking this problem, for certain ongoing activities to continue with special conditions, such as health professionals, pharmaceutical entities, and basically anything that is needed to attack this problem. That's the only thing we have right now. And there's unfortunately two contradictory statements from our undersecretary. When the question was raised to him by press conference about the extent of these essential works, he did mention that it is only logical to imagine that the supply chain is part of these essential activities, and we should ensure that those activities continue. But yesterday, after his message during his press conference, there's a daily press conference on this subject, he stated that although a journalist asked him, is mining sector an essential activity that are we supposed to continue because it's fundamental for the economy? And what he answered is like, unfortunately, not mining, not construction, not even manufacturing activities are supposed to continue. We are encouraging everybody to stay home. So that created again a lot of confusion. Right now, the main focus with all Mexican employers as we speak is, are we supposed to open as of today all businesses? Because yesterday we had the publication of the executive order, which means, and it clearly states that after that publication, no companies are supposed to open except for the essential ones. So we raised to that first question.
Fernando, I think it's incredible also how a populist approach can create such a big uncertainty in these drastic moments. And unfortunately, we are not the only country. We are witnessing that in other countries. It's true that defining essential services is always tricky, but doing it in this manner, I mean, the question of the mining sector is a very legitimate one. Is very damaging, isn't it? At the end of the day, well, you have your regulation, and many of the measures that are being taken are bypassing the existing regulation. You are not sometimes even able to suspend the contracts. Thank you very much for these insights. I want now to give the floor to our member in Sri Lanka, and it's Kanishka. I always have difficulties pronouncing your second name. Sorry, Kanishka, which is where Shinge. I have to tell that they are very active members of IOE, and Kanishka has always been contributing in a very, very constructive manner to all our debates and discussions. So you can give us your insights. And also we have some other members from Asia, and I want to thank them because it's the late night. And Farooq from Bangladesh, the Secretary General of the Bangladesh Employers, you are experiencing tough times then, because it's not just about employment measures, it's about cut of orders from brands in those countries that are, you know, shaking the economy itself. So please, Kanishka, you have the floor. Can you hear us?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Roberto, for the introduction, and it's always a pleasure to join the IOE discussions. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. This is the status of the infection in Sri Lanka. It's at stage 3A, I'm told by the medical experts, and we are watching this situation closely because this is the time that there can be infections in the community and things can pick up. But I must also say and give credit that my government has taken stringent measures to spread the curve of the virus, though it has also hurt us in terms of the economic activities. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Like in all countries, all sectors have been impacted. And this includes, unfortunately, the conventional health sector, because there have been some careless visits by infected parties and without disclosing their histories. So there has been some issues for the conventional healthcare sector as well. That's very unfortunate. Travel, tourism, and hospitality sectors have been the hardest hit because, as you may recall, they were recovering from the ill effects of last year's Easter bombings in Sri Lanka. And this situation does not augur well for them at all. In fact, a majority of them may have to close down temporarily. Manufacturing has also witnessed a drastic drop in orders, and like in the case of, as Roberto mentioned, and my colleague Farooq mentioned the other day, we depend a lot on manufacturing for exports and export earnings. So this has also hit our economy pretty hard. The full economic cost has yet to be calculated, but it is expected that the GDP growth to be revised down to 2.5 or 3% from the earlier projections of 4 to 4.5% growth, and that gives you the size of the impact or the magnitude of the impact on our economy. And this is still early days. The curfew and the measures taken to curb the virus has also hindered normal operations of employers, like in all countries. I thought I'll just share the population details just to give you an idea of the population and the numbers that are employed by us directly. But the EFC employs approximately 10% of the workforce, but considering there are a number of employees who come on board through third-party contractors, which makes the numbers higher. And many of these are daily paid. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. These are the measures taken by the government to handle the health situation. No one can enter the country, only departures are allowed. The port is still working because we need to carry on our economic activities. Curfews have been imposed in all parts of the island since the 20th of March. The authorities are strictly implementing social distancing. Initial decision was to restrict movement and allow limited production and work from home, etc. But this situation changed because of the rapid distribution of infections in the island. Some districts, including Colombo, will be locked down till the 6th, and it looks like that after the partial lifting of curfew in Colombo, like in the other regions, we might have another session of curfew or segment of curfew that will be applied. There's a compulsory quarantine and self-isolation for those returning from overseas, and special concessions have been granted to those manufacturing healthcare products, including personal protection equipment. Essential services are running, but there has been an issue with regard to defining essential services. I like your cartoon, Roberto. It very much applies in this case as well, but we are trying to sort things out. At the moment, we have managed to sort many of these matters. Government stimulus for economic growth include special fiscal incentives and relief packages. They're targeting SMEs and the self-employed and daily paid workers, and the recent one, which is worth about 50 billion rupees, was announced on the 27th of March. Concessions include soft loans, grace periods to pay loans, and leases for certain categories, including business and low-income earners. Concessions have also been granted to obtain working capital loans at a very concessionary rate of interest for businesses. This will definitely help to keep the economy going. Special fund to fight the COVID virus has also been stepped up, and currently it exceeds over 150 million rupees. Next slide. Employer response to the current situation. Well, at the initial stages, we did operate partially, but with the curfew being imposed almost in the entire country, production has been restricted. We are encouraging people to work from home and distant locations, and the IT sector and the IT enabler sectors has continued to operate without much issue. But the production and other services like agriculture have been affected, although the government is permitting agriculture production to go on. Production is also carried out, but using a skeletal staff and special rosters, and you need to get special permits and so on to operate, especially from the health authorities. Production plans implemented after discussion with employees, unions, and worker councils, and Sri Lanka, and we are here thankful to the mature industrial relations system that we have, and wherever there are unions, we have had excellent cooperation from unions as well as worker councils. I believe the unions and the workers both understand that this is a joint effort, and if you are to survive, it has to be a joint effort. So we are extremely happy that the social partners are also reacting positively. We are continuing to maintain, we encourage and continue to maintain high sanitary and OSH conditions in our production facilities and shop floors. Matters such as job sharing strategies are being implemented in a major scale, so that we can bring workers wherever possible in rosters and in shifts, so that there's no overcrowding, and we are so that we augment the health precautions that the authorities are taking.
Kanishka, what we see is that you have a very strong, perhaps company level social dialogue, no, with the trade unions and employers, the working council, right, isn't it?
That's right. We have for some time our industry-based the industry relation system has now focused on the enterprise level. That's right, Robert. Okay. We have very strong enterprise level social dialogue going on, and that has been especially for the private sector. In fact, in a lighter vein, one of my a new member said that we envy you now, because had we had a system of dialogue with our workers a bit stronger, we would have had communique and things like that going on better. But we are trying to set them an example.
That's an interesting point also. If I may stop you here, because otherwise we'll not have time for the other speakers. And I know that we asked you with very short notice. I think it has been very interesting also. I would like also to give the floor to our colleagues from South Africa, and we have Jonathan Colbert from BUSA. BUSA is the main employer organization in South Africa, and they are also witnessing a very drastic measure from the government. So I will not wait more. Jonathan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good day to all the colleagues. Welcome from South Africa. You might not know, but we implemented a very tough lockdown from the 27th of March. We had a couple of 100 infections and we implemented that lockdown from last week, Friday. At midnight Thursday, it kicked in. I focused on the opportunities or the things that we're doing as employers for this talk, and I'll keep it brief. But based on what's been said before me, I just want to go a little bit back to what we do in South Africa. We've got a very, very strong social dialogue platform at NEDLAC, which is our social dialogue body. It's been up and running since we democratized in 1994. It's been the pillar of dialogue with employers, government, trade unions, and to a large extent, social society communities also got a seat on that table. So we established right away a NEDLAC rapid response team to COVID-19. It sits every day, obviously virtually, and the objectives we're trying to do is to protect livelihoods, mitigate the stress of companies and distress of companies, occupational health and safety, and avoid dismissals. Unlike in other areas where in Europe or one area where they've seemed to have outlawed dismissals for economic reasons, we call it operational requirements. That's not the case here in South Africa, and we would battle to get past that. No one's even talking about that at the moment. We also went the route last week about essential services, doing essential service, very much differently to other countries. We've allowed a self-monitoring system where you register on a platform and declare that you are essential service, and you need those documentation for the roadblocks because we are on a complete shutdown except for essential services and the essential goods and services, the services that support those particular employers. So that's important. Our labor laws remain intact. I have some sympathy for our Mexican and other colleagues who've got to deal with the politics on top of these difficult issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. What we've done, we've implemented a COVID temporary employer relief scheme, and I'll talk to some other issues just now, but we've negotiated a complete change to the unemployment insurance fund distribution. So unlike some of the previous speakers where in Italy, in some instances, it's going to the employee, it's just too difficult to get this quickly. Remember, from the 27th of March to the 16th of April, we're in lockdown, and we're worried about workers not getting paid. I'll get into the strategies that employers have and have employed in South Africa compared to the world just now. I'll talk to that in what we're doing in South Africa. So we've negotiated this over the weekend to free the system up. The employer can apply the money, which is it's about it's a maximum percentage off about €1,000 just to quantify it in international denomination. So it's not a large amount of money, but we have many workers who sit mashobi between the €500 and €1,000 per month level. And really, we're trying to accommodate those people who might not be paid because the fundamental principle is no work, no pay. We also have other unemployment insurance benefits, which are for general shutdowns like beyond 7 days. We have the uninsured benefit where you can claim sick leave beyond 7 days from the fund. And if you are infected at the workplace with COVID, then effectively with the virus, then you have a claim under our compensation fund. So that's really what we're doing in South Africa. But I want to explain to you what employers are doing. So we have the social dialogue, which I think is one of the best in the world. We up there and always have been. Maybe in the last couple of years, we haven't been as active and directive as we should have been. But really the change that we've made to the unemployment insurance landscape in this COVID temporary employment relief scheme over the weekend is testimony to the best in class worldwide in terms of how social partners get around and really push government to making changes that need to be made to get the system to work. And there's potential talk of actually outsourcing the system to get it to work with so many people that are going to claim between now and the 16th. And if there's a further shutdown, of course, now till the end of April. So what employers are doing, and I think it's quite a good matrix, and I'm happy if you share my slide with everyone on this slideshow because it helps everyone where you can do that at law, funnel this. So effectively what you do is you decide, well, first of all, in South Africa, are you a distance worker? Can you work remotely or can't you? If you're a distance worker, what we've done in business is we've then paid those people who can still produce. I see in the introduction note to this particular seminar, effectively you've talked about even hourly paid work, but generally firms have gone the route, if you can work remotely, we'll continue to pay you through the lockdown period. Remember, the lockdown period is 3 weeks. What happens after that in terms of payment is a different scenario. Of course, if you get sick, you can claim UIF. If you get sick as a result of doing the job, highly unlikely because you're in lockdown, but if you do and you're not essential service going to work, then effectively you can still claim from the compensation fund. If you go to the other side of the diagram, which will circulate, I'll get the administrator to circulate, then effectively deal with workers who can't work remotely, which is a large part of our working population in South Africa. Similar to you in Sri Lanka, we have a number of people that are in that end of the spectrum. Generally, the starting point in South Africa in terms of South African labor law continues, and it's no work, no pay. What we've done as Business Unity South Africa, we've encouraged people to, employers to be as generous as possible during this time, specifically with the marginalized, the people who don't have significant savings. So we're saying, we accept it's no work, no pay, but if you can pay, you should pay. 2, we've encouraged employers to allow people to take their accrued annual leave. And we've also, again, in terms of the law, we are clear, although there's been different statements from ministries and ministers, similar to you in Mexico, but not from the president, about what you can do or can't do at law. But it's clear in South African law. In terms of the Basic Conditions Employment Act, you can tell people when to take leave. And a lot of employers are invoking that. So people who can't work remotely or produce a service remotely are then asked to then take their annual leave. Of course, you might not have that much annual leave accrued because our big leave period is in December in South Africa. So what we encourage employers as another option is then to allow people to go into leave debit. So you advance them some leave and go into debit, which they have to work back over a couple of months. And then, of course, we've now rechanged this COVID temporary employment employee relief scheme by social partners, which is being implemented as we speak as a result of meetings by the NEDLAC partners, by the trade unions, employers, government, and community over the particular weekend. So that's effectively what we've done. I think where we are potentially short in South Africa at this stage, we just we know day 5 or day 6 of the lockdown, is we don't have the kind of stimulus. There's a small business stimulus package for SME in terms of a loan, but they're nowhere near what is going to be needed to stimulate both the current position with a 3 or 6 week lockdown or post the COVID-19 period. And I think as employers, I love the previous speaker, one of the previous speakers who indicated that we should be thinking post the COVID-19 period, because we're going to get there. And what are we going to do in respect of stimulating the economy, the different forms of work, and the way things have turned out during this particular period. So in summary, that's where we are. Happy to take questions at the end. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. I think the issue related to leave and paid leaves and annual leaves is also quite interesting. We can have an exchange. I want to save time for the exchange precisely. So sorry for those of you who have been cut, but I want to make sure that, and perhaps Kanishka, you can make also a final point in our exchange. I want to give the floor to one of our main partner companies, which is ADECO, and Bettina Schachler, who is the head of public affairs, is one of the most active, I would say, stakeholder for IO in terms of engagement. They are helping us a lot, precisely when we have exchange related to comparative measures regarding employment. And in this case, I think her insights can be very, very useful to all of us. Bettina, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Roberto. Well, thank you to you, Roberto, for this opportunity. Good afternoon to everybody. Obviously, an absolute pleasure to share with you insights from one specific company, from one employer, and maybe, if I can assume so, of interest because of the nature of the ADECO Group's offering, of course. If I may ask to go to the next slide, please. Indeed, for those who don't know or remember, the ADECO Group is a workforce solutions company. So our daily occupation and focus is jobs, is employment, which of course is absolutely at the heart of everything we're discussing right now. We operate in 60 countries, and what I can see sitting at the headquarters in Zurich is that APAC, China, Japan, they in a way have finished the first wave, but actually things might be coming back. There is concern in that region that the effects of the crisis from a health perspective might flare up again. And then, of course, there are all the concerns linked to the very slow economic activity and the absolute non-existence of demand coming usually from the rest of the world. Then we operate all over Europe, and you see there obviously highly impacted by the crisis. That's why you see that arrow in red. We operate in the US, same there. And we operate in Latin America, where we see how the effects of this crisis are starting now to gain traction. We heard our colleague from Mexico. We're present in 9 countries, and we see similar picture. Now, we have 34,000 colleagues around the globe, and I'll come to that just now. But coming back again to those associates, it's over 2 million people. No, sorry, well, over 1 million people. It makes us one of the biggest employers, if not the biggest employer in certain countries, such as France and Italy, for instance. And finally, of interest here to the business community, of course, specifically, we deal with more than 100,000 clients on a daily basis. Now, let's get into the thick of things. If I may ask for the next slide, please. What is our approach towards the handling of this crisis? I mean, clearly, it's the moment to support our clients and customers and our associates, being those workers that trust us every day, even more than usual. These are unprecedented times. This is the moment to be there as a partner. To make it clear for us, the key is on retaining. Our clear focus is we want to keep every colleague, every associate, obviously every client. We want to protect jobs. The last thing we want to do is lay off. Since this is about what measures companies can take and will most likely take, this is to confirm that there are, and what we see as well, the majority of companies out there are looking to avoid layoffs. And clearly, what we're looking to do is once the recovery starts, and by the way, we're not talking post-COVID, we're talking with COVID. So our visibility is that the world for a long time will be taking the effects of COVID with it. So it will be with COVID. So once that recovery starts again, we want to bring everybody back to 100%. Our approach, of course, as one of the employer's private sector partners, is to make full use of economic support measures and instruments that governments are putting at the disposal. Our specific angle towards regulators as well is that for our sector, so obviously right now we are fighting on a daily basis to include staffing companies and importantly our agency workers in those support measures set out by governments. And the fact that I say it here implies that it is not the case. We will see just now that out of all the measures out there, one of the measures that we believe mainly for agency workers is of key importance is the instrument of short time working. And actually, the visibility we have is that it's so far been applied in 22 countries, but only in about 11 countries, 12 countries, does that actually include access to agency workers. Finally, on our approach, it was mentioned already, essential activities, well, for our sector as well, we are fighting to be considered as being a part of that and as being seen as important as we are on that path to recovery. If I may ask for the next slide, please. Now, to come to the measures and the strategy, it's absolutely clear that health and safety come first. And they come first for all of the stakeholders. They come first for anybody at the group, anybody across the 60 countries. And there it is clear, if we look at policy measures, that immediately guidelines and policies on applying health measures were applied. And actually very quickly, the measure that was taken was to shift our colleagues to remote working. If we look at workers, same thing, our associates, same thing. Immediate checking the guidelines and policies on applying health measures, and same thing, very, very quickly, we started to shift our associates to remote working. And then, of course, coming to the clients, the companies who trust us every day, well, it's been interesting because we have almost shifted to a situation where we have been demanding that those health and safety measures be absolutely without any excuse, if I may say so, no negotiation be applied. So we asked for measures such as taking social distance at the workplace. So people should not be too close together if they are still going to work. Obviously, provide the capacity to wash your hands. Obviously, if possible, no desk sharing. But the key as well is that we asked them to take on the solutions that we're bringing, which is, for example, e-learning modules that we offer for associates on health and safety, or, for example, to onboard if they're active right now, or if they're looking to be again in future when the recovery comes, to onboard the business continuity plans and the pandemic plans that we have set out. So health and safety first. But now let's look at the labor measures, if I may ask for the next slide. I would like to just take those 3 minutes to take you through the three different stakeholders that we're looking at and focusing at right now. And the first ones that I will share are our own colleagues. So it's the colleagues that are at the group. And here it is clear that first it is those colleagues that are ill, those colleagues that are directly affected by the COVID-19 virus or showing any symptoms. Well, the measures that we of course take into the consideration immediately sick leave, immediately focus on health recovery, and then for our own colleagues, it is given that they are covered by medical aid and that they will receive sick leave payments. What we've done for our operational and healthy colleagues is immediate shift to remote working. I mentioned it earlier, and if you remember, I gave the number of 34,000 colleagues. Well, we today have 31,000 of our colleagues on remote work across the globe. We also, when it comes to the group and of course our different entities across the world, make whatever we can to tap into those economic support measures for all the right reasons. I mentioned the instrument of short-time work, and I confirm that this is one that we're heavily looking into. Again, I mentioned we have visibility that it's being applied in 22 countries. We might be missing some. Well, out of those 22 countries, we are now looking at putting that into place in quite a number. And obviously the way we put it in place in terms of, well, what percentages of salary, of time reduction, how long it should be applied, that would always depend on the regulation of the country. But that's what we're taking on. One element.
There is one
yes.
point that I would like to make, and if sorry to cut you again, because we have just 10 minutes for questions and answers. One of the critical aspects is considering you as an essential service. I imagine that when dealing with the health sector, having available qualified staff on this area is critical. I have difficulty to see how governments do not see that as an essential need right now, and having good mediation service is critical.
Thank you for the comment, Roberto. Actually, many countries we are not allowed to provide health and medical care personnel. Okay. So that is an issue. Okay. And then what we've also encountered on that topic, for your information, notably in Europe, a lot. If we look at Switzerland, for example, where we are allowed, a lot of the healthcare workers are actually cross-border. And one of the topics that we tackled is the possibility of free movement. And actually just this Monday, the European Commission issued guidance on, again, those essential sectors to allow for the free movement of workers, including in the healthcare sector.
That's very interesting. I may interrupt you here, Bettina, because I want to open the floor we have one question which I think is quite interesting, which is paid leave. I mean, we have the annual leave, and in many jurisdictions, it's difficult to, of course, it's difficult and it's not legal to oblige staff to take leave during this period.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what we see, and that's a question that I open to all of you, and of course for you, Bettina, is that some countries are putting into place a special leave system for this emergency. And I think that, I don't know if it was Paola who referred to that, or some of you, and meaning by that you can have the leave, you can oblige and force the leave now, and then it will be paid back at the end of the year. I don't know whether Farouk, who wanted to take the floor to make a remark, wanted to make a point on that. Farouk from Bangladesh.
Yes, Roberto, thank you so much. In a very quick note, we all understand the severity of the impact. Now, the trend that if we see in a short term, it has been almost 3 months that China experienced to contain. So I believe it should take almost 3 months or little more for almost all the countries. It means we cannot expect a situation which can be termed as normal earliest before July. So from that aspects, I would urge upon IOE to look for what should be done immediately after this particular crisis becomes normal. The number one and the most important issue should be to emphasize on the enterprise sustainability, because there will be so many job losses and further pressure on the enterprises. So enterprise sustainability from the employer's perspective, I would consider that number one priority that we should harp on, which IOE has been always been emphasizing. And with additional emphasis, I am preparing a draft appeal to IOE, where I will explain all other things for IOE and ACTEM's intervention. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you. I mean, both points are really relevant. What is the plan for the coming back to normal, if there is a normal as such? Because that's another question. But we are already working on that. I mean, and we had the Chinese experience, which is quite interesting. I mean, in terms of health, etc. I would like to give a kind of final tour to all the participants, so that if they have a remark precisely on those questions related to pay leave, annual leave, also on the short term contracts and on temporary dismissals, because that's an area that perhaps we didn't deepen much, and it's also having some difficulties in some countries. I don't know if any of you want to take the floor. I think Jonathan from South Africa wanted to take the floor.
Very much. I'll be very brief. We've had this big debate with trade unions who are not liking our current law in respect of forcing people to take annual leave. But the answer to that then is it's unpaid. So you've got an option. I think it's a strategy to soften the blow to allow people to take annual leave now and potentially advance some additional leave in leave debit. Just on the dismissal side, I mean, for companies like in South Africa, there's a full negotiation consultation process around economic dismissals. And that's what we're not advocating. We don't want to do that now because it costs money and takes time. And we're hoping that post a 6-week or a 3-month period that we can get to relaxations of the lockdown. Thank you.
That's an interesting point. I don't know if there are any other comments on that. Bettina, you can make any reference. I think that you wanted to also take the floor also today. Something for Kanishka.
I appreciate that. No, indeed, and of course, this specific diving into the various workers that are out there in the labor market and that employers so far have been tapping into is a very interesting one, and maybe it could warranty another webinar as it is from that perspective. There was one point I wanted to make in addition. So annual leave is something, voluntary annual leave is one of the measures we see that are being suggested by companies. But actually one other measure is to take voluntary salary reductions. This is something that we're starting to see more and more, where employers are just willing to say, okay, this is part of what needs to be done out of solidarity. So I think it's time to highlight that as well.
Kanishka, you wanted to make another point. There is a question from Damian from Argentina. I have the answer to this question. Yeah. Whether there is any dismissal ban in any other country, because Argentina has set up a dismissal ban, dismissal prohibition.
We have a strict law, Roberto.
Spain is the only other country. Kanishka, you have the floor.
Yeah, we have a very strict law in Sri Lanka, which is called the Termination Act, and it applies to even the top paid directors. So in the case of a redundancy, we have to either obtain the consent of the employee or make an application to the Commissioner General for his sanction. So this is the case even with short-term layoffs. That's not to dismiss, but even to for a short-term layoff, we have to follow this law. So it's a bit of a stringent situation in Sri Lanka. I've just come back from a meeting with the Minister and the Commissioner General of Labour, trying to see whether we can at least, have some relief in relation to the process, where the processes can be cut short. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paola, I have a question for you, because I know that in Italy, dismissals are difficult. I mean, perhaps I'm wrong. You just correct me. The dismissal procedure has one of the main sensitive issues in the Italian industrial relations system. But you have managed to set up some measures that at least temporarily can handle the situation from a company perspective. But what about the middle or the long term and the consequence of this crisis for the economy and for the Italian companies? I see some of the question coming back now. I mean, some remarks that can be also helpful to feed the debate.
You mean concerning dismissals or in general, or? Okay, sorry. Yeah, do you hear me now? Do you hear me?
Yes, yes, yeah. Now yes.
Okay, great. Concerning the recovery period after this crisis, perhaps it is interesting to recall the fact that Confindustria has, if this was the question, if I correctly understood, is the fact that Confindustria has presented to the government around 1 week ago a document with a series of proposals going from taxation aspects to suspension of social security payments, and also to a larger extent concerning also the role of Europe, which is very critical now to discuss. But yes, there is also the view to of course to look after this emergency, and we have already filed and transmitted this document with concrete proposals to our government. Yes.
The middle term, no, because the middle term doesn't seem very nice. So, sorry to say, I mean, it's in terms. So if you don't have a system that allows you to restructure quickly, sorry, I mean, there is social consequence. Then we have another problem in the middle term, beyond the short-term measure that you can take, playing with leaves, no, with pay leaves, with a short-term, temporary, etc.
Yes. Well. Let's say that in the very short term in Italy, our solution is to apply the social safety nets that I had mentioned before. This is our concrete way to manage immediately the crisis. And then, of course, we will have to rely on more wide measures. But this is the solution in Italy for the moment. Yeah.
That's helpful. Well, we have many other remarks. Fernando, I don't know if you want to make another final point. I think that I didn't give you the floor twice. If that's okay.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would like to mention is that although the situation here in Mexico is a bit critical and there is uncertainty, what we are encouraging all the employers is to enter into private agreements with trade unions and employees in area of uncertainty, where there's a lot of misinformation, the best course of action, of course, is to get a good agreement with the employees that ensure not only the employment in a post-COVID times, but also to ensure that the workplaces are going to be able to sustain themselves for this time. The measures that the government just gave us are until April 30. So we are supposed to be shutting down our economy for at least 30 days. So that's going to be a big challenge, and that's where we are trying to focus all our attention.
Oh, that's very, yeah, that's very scary a little bit, no? But it's the same in countries. I mean, in the case of Spain is 20% of GDP reduction, which is really scary. But anyway, we'll have to overcome, and also we have to be positive. Sorry,
that's
very
correct.
Germanic in the distribution of time. I was asked to be as Germanic as I can, and nothing against Germany, by the way. But I think the idea is just to have an exchange. We'll have, as usual, all the presentations shared, and also the comments that you saw on the panel. Thank you to all of you, including Tom, Philippines, and our Irish friends who are making some remarks regarding their own system. That also will be captured. And also beyond that, what we are doing is making a kind of outcome document. It's not a policy document, gathering the different measures that are being taken, and will that put at your disposal in the middle term, I mean next week or 10 days at the maximum. Also, I want to encourage you to look at our platform, the platform of IOE that IOE created. There we have key documents from many international organizations, OECD, ILO, etc. But also we have relevant information by country, which can also be helpful. Of course, we have also information related to health and safety. I want to finalize thanking you so much, the panelists. Sometimes we have chased you in a short-term basis, but it has been great to have you online. That's what makes us relevant in terms of added value to you as members and companies. And also a final thank to the IOE team, which has been working hard also to have this exchange and to be effective. Keep safe and keep online. Thank you so much.
Thank you all there for helping us so much. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Tom.